The talent is in his hands, his eyes, and most importantly, his soul. Hans Skalagard is a world-renowned nautical painter, and his works can be found in a number of private collections, public buildings, and maritime museums. If you've seen a painting of a sailing ship in, say, the last 60 years or so, it's a pretty good bet that Hans painted it. At 87, Hans brings a unique perspective to his paintings of ships and the sea.
Well, I have always sketched from the time I was a child. It could never keep me away, if I had a piece of paper or a pencil. But back in those days, the kids, we all had chores to do. So therefore, I didn't have much of my own time. And then when I went back on board a ship at sea, I still had to paint, sketching, and what have you.
Skalagard is a man of the sea, and long before he made his living as a painter, he was a sailor. He was born in a remote Viking stronghold called the Faroe Islands between the Norwegian Sea and the North Atlantic. The language he spoke as a youngster growing up dates back to around the year 900.
Old Norse, the Old Norwegian, which was spoken in Norway almost 1,100 years ago. And that's the reason they call it the Old Norse. It has nothing to do with Danes whatsoever. A Dane cannot understand a Faroe Islander. The Faroe Islander, of course, doesn't understand Danish because back in those days, they were forced on you.
If you were born in the Faroe Islands, it's a pretty good chance you were going to become a fisherman, and Hans was no exception.
I always wanted to go to sea from the time I was a child. Because my generation in the Faroe Islands, there was an old saying, a man-child was born with an oar in his hand. We just want to be at sea, period.
At 13, Hans Skalagard shipped out as an apprentice seaman on a two-masted schooner.
That was a really terrible hard work, cod fishing up in the Arctic.
Very quickly, Hans learned that despite his age, when the command all hands on deck was given, that means everyone.
I was tired. Next thing I know, the mate had me by the scruff of my neck and a big hand in the back of my back, and he heaved me out on the deck, and as I went out on the deck, big leather boots in my behind. From then on, guess who was the first on deck and was all hands? That was Hans. You came on board a ship to do a man's job, and by God, you were going to do it.
Skalagard joined the Merchant Marine in the late 1930s, and eventually, sail gave way to steam engines. Hans made the transition, but the hum of machines lacked the drama of unfurling sails and the romance of his youth.
It was such an exciting life because you were part of the ship. You were the one that would drive in the ship. In other words, your work and your labor was the engine of the ship.
Whenever Skalagard had free time, he was up on deck drawing and sketching. However, that all changed with the outset of war in Europe. In 1940, while sailing in the North Atlantic aboard the ship Skalagard in the Denmark Strait, he was torpedoed and his ship was sunk by a German submarine.
And we were 52 ships in the convoy. We lost 22 ships out of that convoy. The submarines, that back in those days, they had, what they call the wool packs. She was gone in 4 minutes, less than 4 minutes. Everybody just more or less stepped right off, in a boat. The sea temperature, if you landed in it, believe it or not, was 29 degrees. That's pretty cold, isn't it? Huh? 29 degrees. You sure didn't last very long on that one.
Amazingly, Hans was sunk twice more before the end of the war. Once again by German torpedoes, and then for a third time by German bombers in the North Atlantic. Nevertheless, Hans remains rather stoic about his brush with mortality.
You look at it this way here, this is my work and this is what I'm going to do. Because everything in Merchant Marine was volunteers. Everybody. Nobody was forced to do it. And you take it as they come, wartime and otherwise. And as we say in the Merchant Marine, peace or war, so you were out there, that's it.
Hans remained in the Merchant Marine and continued to paint and draw after the war. In 1953, he had his first show in New York. Success followed, and he met and married his wife Mignon in San Francisco, but he returned to his dual careers as sailor and painter. Eventually, however, Skalagard focused his efforts on painting full-time, and the subject matter remained ships and the seas they sailed on.
I have the Navy logs from that particular vessel at a given time, and that's what I base my painting on. And then a description, in the show, will exactly show that right there, see.
Hans really had very little formal training in the art of painting.
I still say mostly self-taught. And believe it or not, Red of the great painters through the centuries has always been self-taught. It's something you're born with, because nobody's going to tell me, and anybody can be a composer, classical composer and so forth. It's something, it's within your system that drives you. And the main thing is, bringing the light down.
Even at 87, Hans continues to paint every day. He's had a number of exhibits across the country, and the work ethic that was instilled in him as a young boy when he first went to sea continues to this day. His paintings and drawings now total in the thousands.
In the oils, like I said before, probably 3,500. And about 1,200 watercolors. And drawings, I just won't quit, and I have a whole room, of 60 years of drawing. Those hands just keep going.
For more than half a century, Hans Skalagard has made a very successful living as a painter. However, when his time comes, he wants to be buried at sea. He is, after all, a Faroe Islander, a descendant of Vikings, and in his heart, he is still a sailor.
When I leave this earth, when they're going to read my eulogy, singing, I must go down to the seas again to roll the sea in the sky, and all I ask is a tall ship, a star to steer her by.